Greetings, everyone. I am Sartora Schumann Smith, Project Manager here at the Corporation to Develop Communities, and welcome to the CDC Experience, our monthly podcast where we feature amazing guests and amazing topics. Today, it is my pleasure to welcome a friend, a community partner, and someone who I truly admire, Miss Laurel Jones. We're going to get into a topic that's a little late this month, but we're better late than ever. This is our belated Veterans Day edition. And before we begin, I would like to just say, please tune into YouTube for this podcast, or you can go to any social media platform and find us there with the CDC Experience. So welcome, Laurel.
Well, thank you for having me.
Wonderful. I am so happy to have you here. And again, like I told our audience, this is our belated Veterans Day edition. So I am happy to have you here. I've known Laurel for a couple of years now, and I know she wears many hats in our community, one of those being chairman of the board for Dress for Success, is an organization that we partner with our workforce program, but you also wear a hat that has brought you here. Well, you did for many years.
Yes.
Laurel is retired lieutenant colonel with the Air Force. Whenever I hear that, that's just so impressive. That sounds so impressive. So we're going to jump right into it, Laurel.
Okay.
What I want to ask first is an easy question. What was it that influenced you or motivated you to join the military?
Great question. So it started actually when I was in high school. Air Force was one of the individuals who actually sought me out to give me a scholarship. And so we explored those options. And I can remember when the recruiter came to the house and sat around our dining room table. And so I knew this was a big deal because normally we'd be in the kitchen.
Okay.
And so we're there around the dining room table and he's telling my parents about it. And with this scholarship, it's like, we'll pay fully for your college. And then you'll have a 4-year, get commissioned as an officer and then have a 4-year commitment.
Oh, okay.
And so, I had a lot of other offers, but I thought, oh, that sounds interesting. I was like, 4 years? Okay, let's do it.
Okay.
And so that's what led me to the Air Force. So I did the ROTC program at Syracuse University, got my degree, a BS in accounting, and then was commissioned a second lieutenant. And it was off to the races with the Air Force then.
Okay. So how many years did you do total in the Air Force?
23 years.
23 years.
Went by quickly.
23 years. And it all started at the dining room table.
That's right.
Most things happen in the kitchen.
For sure.
But like you said, that was the dining room table, so you knew it was big. So let me ask another question. As I was getting my questions together, I was thinking about, so many people sign up for the military. They sign up. They say, I'm going to the military. But if you were to speak to a young lady right now, what would your advice be to a young woman that wants to go into the military right out of high school?
Well, I'd say make sure that you are ready for discipline. Make sure that you're willing and ready to get outside of your comfort zone, because wherever you are, that's not necessarily where you're going to stay. You're going to go to school, you'll be trained, and then you'll be stationed, could be anywhere around the world. And so I would let them know so they're prepared for that. I would also tell them, be prepared for an environment with others who are like you, who are looking to do something a little bit different. And so I would still encourage individuals to do it. For me, it was a great way of life. And even if they want to just do it for a few years, you get that experience of being around people not necessarily like you, not from your neighborhood, not even from your state, and it just broadens your perspective. So from that perspective, I would definitely encourage it.
Okay, and I love that you said it broadens your perspective. So often we keep ourselves in a box, that we don't step outside of our comfort zone, whether that's you don't step outside of your culture, you don't step outside of your community, but you also said something that was very important, discipline.
For sure.
If you're not ready for discipline, then you might want to get ready.
And again, that's the kind of discipline, and it's not just, marching in orders, but you have to be disciplined if you're in the corporate world, if you're in the nonprofit world. You have to know how to take orders. You have to know how to let your word be your bond. If you say you're going to do it, the expectation is you're going to do it. And I think that's an important skill to hone and to tweak while you're growing up.
So let me ask you this. I'm getting this visual because I can't even imagine myself. Not that I don't have discipline,
Right.
but the being so regimented. You know, it's like, how do you adapt to? You're going to get up at a certain time. You're going to eat breakfast at a certain time. Those things. How did you adjust to that?
Well, that's just a small piece of it. And that's really when you're going through training.
Okay.
Now, and it's different whether you're coming in as an enlisted person or an officer. So obviously I came in as an officer. So at the 2-year point, I've already gone through my freshman and sophomore year. Then they sent us, in my case, I went to Dover Air Force Base for the summer, what we call summer training camp. And so that was really when we're doing the marching and having that kind of regimentation. It's like, okay, make sure your bed is made this way, all of those kinds of things. But that's not the full experience. That was literally just for that moment in time.
Okay. And I think like I just did, I think we have those preconceived notions of what military life is like and what you see on TV, so that's what I'm thinking. It's like, I have to do this, I have to do that. But again, everybody needs discipline. And because you use discipline all the time. So that's great. So you talked about one of the things that's good about the experience was being able to go all over the world. If you had to name 2 places that you really, really enjoyed the experience, what 2 places would that be?
Well, to go back to, when I talk about broadening your experience, and I said, I went into the Air Force, I'm like, okay, I'm gonna serve 4 years. But my mindset at that time as well, my 20-year-old self was like, I'm gonna do my 4 years and hope to never go overseas. That was the mindset that I had at that point, which is amazing. And anyone who knows me now knows I love to travel. I consider myself a world traveler.
Okay.
But my mindset was, oh no, I'm gonna go in 4 years, hope they don't send me too far from home, and then I'm gonna get out. Well, how things work out. So at the 2-year point, I was stationed in Phoenix, Arizona, at Luke Air Force Base, my very first assignment. Then I get assigned to Korea. The last time I checked, Korea was not in the United States.
Nowhere close.
So that's not the United States, is it? And so I went, and I will tell you, it was an amazing experience because it got me well outside of my comfort zone. But what I learned there is no matter where you go, if you are open, you're going to make great friends. You're going to have a good time. And I became friends with a woman. Her name was Bobby Ann McKnight. We were friends for almost 30 years until she passed away in 2011. And that started because we were there in Korea together, and that friendship continued. She was my matron of honor and all of that.
Really?
I mean, we still were connected for decades. And so that assignment, even though Kunsan at that point, it was such a small base. When we got a Baskin and Robbins there, that was a day of celebration. Really? So that's the kind of, but because it was small, you got that camaraderie. We became good friends. And so looking back on it, that was certainly, if it's not my favorite, certainly my most pivotal assignment. Because that's what, after I got that back from that, I'm like, well, this is the worst. I said, okay, bring it.
Okay.
Okay. And so then 4 years turned into 6, turned to 10 to 20, but it started there because otherwise, to be honest, I'd have been gone.
Okay.
Another assignment that will probably surprise people that I loved is my time at the Pentagon. And I had 2 tours, as a matter of fact, at the Pentagon. I love the area, Washington, D.C. area, and I got to meet so many interesting people. And of course, it's a pressure cooker, because when the general needs something, he or she needs it yesterday. And so I learned to think quickly on my feet, because nobody needs a blank sheet of paper. Come up with your ideas, collaborate with your teammates, collaborate with your coworkers, and make it happen. And it makes you just keep tweaking it, because what we were doing was developing policies that affected other individuals in the military. And so that would spur us to do our best work because it was going to benefit others. And so you just give 100%. That was a great experience.
Really? Okay. And that's interesting because my next question is perfect for that, but I'm going to make sure I remind everybody that you can find us on all social media platforms. You can also find the CDC Experience at our website at www.cdcoftampa.org. I'm here today interviewing Ms. Laurel Jones, who is a retired lieutenant colonel with the Air Force. And we're just talking about her experiences and I'm going to ask for some tips later. She just gave us some advice for young women who may want to go into the military. But you just talked about one of your favorite assignments being the Pentagon.
Right.
When you hear Pentagon, you automatically think stress.
Right.
You know, it's like, oh, this is serious. This is the big league. So let me ask you, how do you or did you manage stress once you were not on the Air Force clock?
Well, if everywhere I've gone, I always have a community, including my church community.
Okay.
And so, I made friends outside of the Air Force as well. And so, my involvement, particularly with my church or with my sorority, those were definitely positive outlets for me. And you have to have that. And of course, being physically fit is a part of the military environment, but it also does help relieve stress. So all of that.
Okay.
Yeah.
And not to dredge up any negative memories or anything, but were you at the Pentagon during 9/11?
No, as a matter of fact, when 9/11 happened, I was commanding a squadron in Japan at Yokota Air Base, which is about an hour away from Tokyo. And I can remember that day. Of course, we're 12 hours ahead. I worked all day. I was in my fatigues and had on my combat boots and came home, turned on the Today Show at night, and Katie Couric was talking about what had just happened. And I can remember I sat back on the couch, put my boots back on, and went to work because I'm like, this is going to affect all of us. And it did. And from that day, for months and months and months, it did. I was, like I said, it was a comptroller squadron, but what we did, we had to deploy to support the base. And so, I had folks who were deployed all around the base. Our hours, we're working 12, 15 hours a day. And it was quite the experience. And then after I left Yokota, I came back to my second tour at the Pentagon. And you talk about triggering. I can remember there's an area, so the Pentagon is obviously it's 5 state-sided building. In the middle of it, there's a courtyard. And so one of the places I'd love to have lunch, on the nice days, take lunch and sit out there. I remember when I first got back to the Pentagon, took my lunch and I sat out there, and then I just kind of froze because I was thinking about the disaster that had happened, and those people were helpless. They didn't even know what was coming, flying. And so when you hear some noise, you're like, okay, what's really going on? And this was a year after 9/11, but I still remember that feeling of unease.
Okay.
For sure.
I can't imagine.
Yeah.
I can't imagine. And I can only imagine how traumatic that was and still probably is for some. Let me ask this, how much mental health assistance is offered for those who are in the military, who are serving now or serving then? Is there a strong mental health component or piece that's provided for those serving?
Absolutely, for those serving and also for veterans, because PTSD, that's real for certain. And definitely with all of the encounters that we have had over the past several decades, there is definitely, whether it's from the hospital or the actual mental health clinics, there's definitely something available for individuals. But the thing that I think we're still working on is removing the stigma about seeking help. And so that starts from the top down.
Okay.
And so as a commander, I think it's important that you know your people. And so if you see something is not quite, they don't seem quite right, to have that one-on-one conversation and encourage them to seek help, because then they know like this is not a negative, it's a positive, it's a sign of strength to get help when you need it.
And thank you for that, because that also shows the character in your leadership. When you can see and identify that something's not right here, something's going on, and not to immediately go into the negative, like, oh, they're slacking or they're not attentive or they're not doing this. It might be something going on that they haven't addressed or someone hasn't addressed. And I just want to say to the audience, mental health is real. We hear that all the time, and at some point for me it became cliche because you continue to hear mental health is real. But I think we have a responsibility within our families, within the workplace, to get people the help that they need, or even if you share your own stories.
Right. But it starts with knowing your people. Like, wherever you are, particularly as a senior leader, you can't shut yourself off from those that you're leading. Because if they don't feel a connection, if you don't have a connection, they're getting the mission done, but at what expense? And so I think it comes together. And I think as a leader, you have that responsibility, whether it's in the military or it's in the corporate environment, to know your people, to be proactive about that, to be accessible, to be available. That's how you make that connection. And one of the things that I would always talk about when I was a commander, I said, I never get great news when they come to my office, because it's there, one of the branches, I want to let you know this is what's going on, Colonel. But when I always got the good news, and when I made myself available and went out and walked around and said, hey, how's the wife doing? Hey, didn't you all just have some puppies at your house? What's your daughter doing? Didn't she dance? To make those connections. And that's what really fueled me. And then when you've got those connections, there's nothing that they won't do for the mission, because they see that they come together, that you care for them. In the military, we always have the question, they said, what comes first, people or mission? And the answer is yes, because they both go together.
Yeah. And I admire you for that, because that's relationship building. Right. And I think people forget that. It's like, so people so often want to be taskmasters, and we want to do this and we need to do this, but we also need to develop those relationships, because this goes back to even grandma's or mom's old school advice. You get more honey, you get more bees with honey
than with vinegar.
That's right. So the fact that you took the time to get to know your people, I think that is awesome. And I have one last question for you, because it's almost time for us to wrap up. Can you share an experience or a time where you had to advocate for yourself or for another female member?
Well, before I do that, I can think of where someone advocated for me.
Okay.
So it was on my first tour to the Pentagon. I was coming from that time from Turkey, and I had met this woman who was a colonel, and she left Turkey and then went to the Pentagon. Unbeknownst to me, at that time she went in and met my boss, who was also a colonel, and talked me up, if you will, and shared her experiences with me. And I didn't work for her, but we worked together. And so because of that, when I stepped into that office, and I think I was a major at that point, because of that, my boss immediately gave me more responsibilities, because she's seen my resume, they hired me, if you will, in the military. But because of that personal connection that she had with this colonel who had come to speak on my behalf, it changed the environment. And and that's so important just in general, to have someone who will speak up for you, who in the room when you're not in the room.
Yes, ma'am.
And so that's something that even now that I continue to do. And so one of the things that I had the opportunity to do, and when I was at Yokota, I was probably the senior Black female officer on the base. I was, commander, finance, comptroller, we're handling all the money. But I was very accessible, very well known around the base. So a lot of young officers, junior officers, would come to me, and I would able to mentor them and guide them. And sometimes it's about tough love. They'd say, oh, well, my commander is saying this. And sometimes I'd say, they're right, and this is why, and this is what you need to do. And other times I would tell them, well, let's see what else, again, what can you do? Because it's about what can you control? What can you control? And then, unbeknownst to them, I would go and maybe talk with their commanders who were my colleagues, and say, hey, how are things going? And see if I could influence that in any way.
Okay. I love it. Thank you. And I have so many other questions, but I always have so many great guests that these conversations are always so fulfilling for me and hopefully for you. So again, I'd like to thank my friend Laurel Jones, but also I'd like to thank Lieutenant Colonel Laurel Jones, retired Lieutenant Colonel Laurel Jones with the United States Air Force. Thank you so much, Laurel, for being our guest here on the CDC Experience. And again, go to all social media platforms and you can catch this podcast, or you can always go to our website at www.cdcoftampa.org.
Well, thank you. This has been wonderful.
Thank you.